Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a feeling that I think is becoming really familiar for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's that moment where you know what the right thing to do is, ethically speaking, but that knowledge it doesn't lead to a decision. It just sort of hangs there.
Right, there's a disconnect.
Exactly. And to be clear, our deep dive today isn't suggesting that morality is collapsing or that, ethics have just disappeared.
At all.
It's about something structural.
Right.
It's about why it's getting harder and harder to apply those ethical rules to some of these massive modern systems we all have to deal with.
It's that feeling when your moral compass is working perfectly, but the entire landscape has become, say, one giant magnet. It just pulls the needle in one direction no matter what.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So how do we start to even analyze that?
Well, the sources we looked at suggest we need a different kind of tool. We
Right.
have to set aside judgment just for a moment and start with an analytical framework. Think of the standard stories we hear about the economy, about technology, as a beam of white light. It looks simple, linear.
Straightforward progress.
Exactly. The framework in the sources, called an Economic and Computational Prism, or ECP, asks us to pass that light through a prism
And break it down.
and break it down. It doesn't tell us what's right or wrong. It just shows us the component parts, the non-linear structures hidden inside that simple story.
So it's less about a verdict and more like an X-ray. We're trying to see the bones of the problem.
Precisely. We're trying to understand why our judgment device, our ethics, just silently stops.
Yeah.
And it usually happens when the legitimacy of these huge global foundations like markets or infrastructure gets called into question.
Okay, let's make that more concrete then. What are these systems that are causing this stall in our decision-making?
The sources describe them as systems that have become so concentrated they form what's called a base ecology.
A base ecology.
Yeah. Think about major global financial markets, core digital infrastructure, the foundational AI models everyone is building on, all the standards that hold it together. These aren't just big companies anymore.
So what's the difference? We've always had monopolies, right?
The key difference is the possibility of exit. With these systems, the option to disengage, to simply not participate is, well, it's basically gone.
You can't opt out.
You really can't. Global finance, computation, they're all converging into what one source called a single OS, a global operating system.
So it's like the entire world is running on one piece of software and you can't uninstall it.
That's a perfect analogy. You can have all the variety you want with the apps on top, but the base layer, the protocols you connect to, they're fixed. If you want to be part of the modern world, you have to use the OS.
Okay, this idea of choice impossibility is really interesting. Let's look at a real-world example. How about in the financial world with something like ESG?
Perfect example.
ESG, environmental, social, governance metrics, they were designed as these clear ethical roadmaps for investors, right?
Yeah.
To help them make better
That was
choices.
the idea, yeah.
But imagine you're managing a huge pension fund. You are personally and professionally committed to ESG. But the whole premise falls apart when the choice to not invest in a huge foundational part of the market becomes impossible.
Exactly. What if that manager has ethical concerns about, say, the entire foundational tech sector? Maybe it's energy use, maybe it's labor practices.
Right.
If they pull all their money out, they will almost certainly fail to meet their benchmarks. They'll underperform, they'll fail their fiduciary duty to their retirees. That's the trap.
That's the choice impossibility.
That's it. To survive, to do their job, they must participate. The structure itself demands it, regardless of the ethical framework.
And that exact tension is now playing out, maybe even more intensely, in the world of AI. With the foundational models, the huge compute resources. It's all controlled by a tiny handful of players.
Absolutely. And when questions come up about bias in those models, or safety, or their legitimacy, what are your options?
You can't just build your own from scratch.
Not if you're a government or a large research institution. It's not realistic. If your country's entire infrastructure, from healthcare to defense, is starting to rely on these systems, cutting ties isn't a strategic choice. It's closer to abandoning survival conditions, and that's not a moral judgment on the company providing the service. It's just a recognition that it's become part of the environment.
Abandoning survival conditions. Wow. That phrase really hits hard because it explains why things don't seem to change on the outside, even when there's huge ethical pressure.
It's not that people don't feel the pressure, it's that the system doesn't have the exit ramp that we assume should be there.
It's an environmental condition.
It is. It's like if the only oxygen in a sealed room is controlled by an entity you don't trust, You can't make the ethical choice to stop breathing. You still have to breathe.
So let's go deeper on that. If the problem is in the structure itself, what is it about ethics as a tool that makes it just fail at this level?
Well, the core finding in the sources is that ethics is not structurally versatile.
What does that mean?
It means it has a prerequisite. Ethics really only works in layers of reality where choice possibility actually exists.
Okay.
So if I'm buying software for my company and I have 3 vendors to choose from, ethics is a great tool. It helps me decide. But when that software becomes the single, unavoidable operating system for my entire industry.
The choice is already made for you.
Right. The ethical function just loses its grip on the system itself.
And is there a name for that process when something goes from being a tool to being the whole environment?
The sources call it environmentalization or OSification. And when that happens, this is where the prism idea comes back in.
Okay, so walk me through the refraction. What's happening to the light?
Ethics assumes it can travel in a straight line. It assumes if something is wrong, we can act directly on it, change it, leave it, whatever.
A causes B.
Right. But when the base system hardens, becomes an environment, that straight line hits a wall it wasn't designed for. The ethical principle is refracted, it gets bent, it loses its intended meaning because it was aimed at a layer it can no longer pass through.
Okay, I have to push back a little here because for a lot of people listening, this might sound like a very academic way of just saying that people are afraid to stand up to power.
That's a fair question, a really important one.
So where do the sources draw that line between a real structural limitation and, just a lack of moral courage?
And they are very clear about this. This analysis is not about individual cowardice. It's describing a structural condition.
Yeah.
The problem has literally grown beyond what they call the designable domain.
The designable domain.
The sphere where our choices can still make meaningful changes to the core of the system.
I see.
And that brings us to this idea of the meta-constraint. Or you could call it the uncuttable constraint. The actors in the system, investors, governments, you are operating inside constraints that you literally cannot sever no matter how wrong you think they are.
So if you can't cut the constraint, your behavior has to change.
It fundamentally changes. It stops being a pure moral decision and it becomes an adaptation. You're adapting to the conditions of your environment.
So trying to assert this is right or we should exclude this system.
It gets converted into decision impossibility. The system's architecture just doesn't compute that command. You can yell about it, but there's no exit button to press.
Okay, I think that's a crucial point.
Right.
Because recognizing that can feel, well, pretty hopeless. It can feel like we should just give up. So we have to ask, does this analysis just justify inaction?
No. And the sources are really, really insistent on this. This is not about resignation. It is about precision.
Okay.
It's about finding the boundary point, the exact place where our judgment stalls so that we can see where design is still possible.
We're looking for the edge of the operable region.
Exactly. A structural analysis isn't trying to fix the unfixable core. It's just trying to map the boundary between the operable region, where we still have agency, and the inoperable region.
And the inoperable region is just, what? History. Physics.
Basically, yeah. History, geography, the fundamental physics of the system, the parts that are, for all practical purposes, fixed.
So if we accept that the core OS is uncuttable, that ethics can't change it directly, where do we redirect that energy?
You have to retreat to the interfaces. You stop trying to apply ethics to the OS itself, and you start focusing on the terms of engagement.
You focus on the connections.
On the connection conditions, the usage conditions, on boundary design. We can't change the foundational AI model, maybe, but we can build ethical firewalls around how it's used. We manage the flow and the consequences, not the source itself.
So just recognizing that our tools have limits is the first step.
It is. It gives you a cognitive starting point. It answers that first question you ask, why did my sense of rightness not land?
Right.
And realizing it hit a structural wall, not a moral void, that changes everything about your next move.
So we've really traced this path from ethics as this all-purpose tool to ethics hitting a kind of structural ceiling. And the challenge isn't figuring out what's right, but finding out where you can still act on that knowledge.
Exactly. And when you're dealing with systems that are truly not optional, concepts like exclusion have to change. They become less about judging entry and more about managing an unavoidable passage.
The goal becomes learning to read the environment you're in, not just your own intentions.
Which leaves us with a few questions for you to think about. In this hard OS-like world, where in your own life does ethical judgment seem to stop working? And what layers, what interfaces are still adjustable?
That's a big one.
And if we shift our focus from correctness to passage possibility, how we navigate these unavoidable systems, how does that change how you think about design in your own work?
And maybe the last question is the most personal.
Does the simple act of recognizing these moments, of just quietly anchoring that pressure point where judgment stalls, does that alone change how you think and act inside these environments?
Something to consider. Understanding the structure is often so much more important than just judging the impression. We'll see you next time for another Deep Dive.